My parents kicked me out at 17, saying I was dead weight. They spoiled my younger brother with everything. 20 years later, they called me from a motel room, homeless and broken. I whispered, "Good luck." Do you think I was too harsh? I asked my husband last night after I ignored my parents' latest voicemail from a motel payphone. He looked at me for a long time, not answering right away. Finally, he said, "I think you were the only one who ever showed them mercy. And they mistook it for weakness." And that's when I realized. I don't feel guilty. I don't feel relieved. I don't even feel anger. I just feel done. This is the story of how I got there. I was 17 when I left my parents' house for the last time. Not by choice, exactly. But I didn't beg to stay either. My parents, Harold and Diane, told me flat out that I was dead weight and they were done wasting resources on me. I remember Diane lighting a cigarette at the kitchen table while Harold flipped through bills and muttered about Caleb's club soccer dues being late. Caleb, my little brother, was 15 at the time and already treated like a prodigy. He had private lessons, special travel trips, and my parents were convinced he'd get a full ride to some D1 college if they just invested in his future. I was not considered an investment. I was sunk. The draft pick that never paid off. I wasn't failing in school, I had a 3.2 GPA and was on track for early graduation. I had worked part-time since I was 15, handing over half my paycheck to the house and saving the rest for college. I even applied to SUNY schools on my own, and got accepted into Oswego's early childhood education program. But none of it mattered. They said I was ungrateful. Lazy. A burden. And they told me to leave. So I did. I packed 2 duffel bags, one with clothes, the other with a few books and toiletries, and walked to my friend Danny's house 2 neighborhoods over. I didn't cry. Not then, not when I found out later they emptied my savings account, not when I had to drop out of school temporarily to pay rent in a shared room above a Chinese takeout place. I worked 3 jobs over the next few years, waitressing, janitorial night shifts, even telemarketing. I got my GED. I finished a community college degree. Eventually, I transferred into SUNY Cortland, then started working toward my teaching certification while tutoring kids in math just to keep the lights on. My parents never checked in. Not once. Caleb never called either. I heard through old neighbors that Caleb got a partial scholarship to Hofstra, partied his way through 2 semesters, and dropped out. My parents were furious at the school, not at him. They took out loans. Sold the car. Remortgaged their already underwater house. Still, they sent him to Europe for a gap year to help him find himself. Meanwhile, I was clipping coupons and washing my clothes in a bathtub. It's wild how you stop expecting apologies after a while. How silence becomes normal. How even pity starts to feel like too much to give. When I turned 28, I finally landed a steady teaching job at a small charter school in Rochester. It paid modestly, but it gave me weekends back and a decent enough insurance plan. I met Simon at a friend's birthday party, a civil engineer, raised by a single mom, and quiet in a way that makes you lean in to hear more. We dated for 4 years before getting married. We bought a house together. We made joint grocery lists. Planted vegetables. Got a cat. No children. Neither of us were interested in repeating history. My parents didn't come to the wedding. Caleb RSVP'd, "Can't make it, best wishes." That was it. No card. No call. Just 5 typed words and a name that felt like a stranger's. I hadn't heard anything from any of them for nearly a decade. Until a month ago. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was grading essays with a cup of tea when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from a blocked number. I almost ignored it. But something about the silence made me curious. When I played it, I recognized the voice instantly, cracked, desperate, barely a whisper. "Mariel. It's your father. We're in trouble. Please. We're at a motel. I don't know where else to go." Your mother's sick. We don't have anything left. I sat frozen, the mug of tea slowly cooling in my hand. Part of me wondered if it was a scam. Another part of me didn't care if it was real. I didn't call back right away. That night, I played the voicemail for Simon. He listened without interrupting. When it ended, he sat still for a few moments before asking, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I said. "I guess I wanted to know if they were alive. That's it." 3 days later, they called again. Different motel. Same desperation. I finally answered on the third call. It was Diane this time. Her voice was hoarse and dry, like someone who hadn't eaten in a while. She told me they lost the house 2 years ago. Caleb cut them off after his latest divorce. They'd been moving between motels, hoping someone would help. He said we ruined him, she whispered. He won't even let us meet our grandkids. There was a long pause. I didn't fill it. We're all alone now, Mariel, she said. For a second, I almost laughed. I thought of the nights I'd spent alone in a freezing room, eating ramen from a coffee pot. I thought of the letter I sent when I got my GED, never answered. I thought of every birthday, every holiday, every emergency I had survived without them. I thought of how they threw me out like trash. You made your choice, I said. We didn't know what we were doing, she cried. We thought we were helping Caleb. We thought he'd take care of us later. Good luck, I whispered. And I hung up. I didn't sleep much that night. Simon noticed. He always does. We lay in bed with the window cracked open, the soft rustling of the trees making it feel like the world was exhaling around us. They'll probably call again, he said. I know. What will you do? I stared at the ceiling. Nothing. And I meant it. At least I wanted to mean it. The next morning, I deleted the voicemail, but the words stayed with me. I went to work as usual, kept my smile tight and professional, nodded through meetings and made polite jokes in the break room. No one would have guessed I was carrying a ghost on my shoulders. Or two. During my lunch break, I sat in my car and opened a Facebook search. I typed in Caleb's full name. I hadn't looked him up in years. He looked older than 38. Worn around the eyes. His profile was sparse, barely any posts, but his wife had public photos. They had 2 kids. A boy and a girl. The captions were cheerful, the smiles strained. There were hashtags like #grateful and #blessed and #Wigothis that read like denial more than joy. I closed the app. They had built a life and burned the bridge they needed most. Just like they had with me. I didn't want to be consumed with bitterness. I didn't want my history with them to define how I lived now. But I couldn't lie to myself either. They had taught me something. Just not in the way they intended. They taught me how to survive when no one was coming to save me. They taught me that family isn't who you're born to, it's who doesn't flinch when things fall apart. And maybe most of all, they taught me how not to treat people I love. Still, I couldn't stop the ache. You don't stop being a daughter just because your parents stop acting like ones. That weekend, I drove past a diner I hadn't seen since I was 20. The sign was faded. A few letters flickered. But it was still there. That place used to be my sanctuary. I worked weekend breakfast shifts for tips and leftover pie. The owner, Marta, had once given me a free meal after finding out I'd been sleeping in the storage room. She never asked questions. She just handed me a plate and said, "No one deserves to starve." I wondered if she was still alive. I wondered if she knew that kindness shaped me more than my own mother's voice ever did. Back at home, I sat in the backyard with Simon, watching the cherry blossoms drift lazily through the air. It was quiet. Peaceful. Until my phone buzzed again. Blocked number. I let it ring out. Voicemail. Simon watched me carefully but didn't say a word. I waited 10 minutes. Then pressed play. This time it was Caleb. Mariel, it's me. I know we haven't talked in years. I know I probably don't have a right to call. But Mom and Dad, they're not doing well. I tried to help, but I stopped the recording. There was no rage. No explosion. Just numbness. Like watching a movie you've seen 100 times, waiting for a different ending that never comes. I stared at the phone in my hand and thought, why now? Why call me? Why pretend I mattered after all this time? I could have blocked the number. I could have sent a message that said, don't ever call me again. But instead, I just put the phone down. The weight of that decision, the act of doing nothing, was heavier than I expected. Simon came back outside with tea. He didn't ask what was on the voicemail. He didn't need to. Instead, he sat beside me and took my hand. We didn't speak for a while. The breeze picked up, cherry petals falling into our laps. Do you want to talk about it? He asked quietly. Not yet. Okay. I leaned my head against his shoulder and closed my eyes. I wasn't sure what I would do next. But I knew what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't go running toward the fire just because the people who lit it were finally screaming. The next few weeks passed in a kind of suspended reality. I didn't answer any more calls. I didn't listen to any more voicemails. But I knew they were still coming. Simon, bless him, never pushed. He let me handle it the way I needed to. There's a kind of grace in being loved by someone who understands silence. At work, I poured myself into lesson plans. I stayed after school with students who needed extra help. I made bulletin boards for every season, added little gold stars to papers even when no one asked for them. Maybe it was a distraction. Maybe it was me trying to be the kind of adult I wished I'd had. One afternoon, a student named Layla stayed behind after class. Her backpack was torn. One strap held together with a shoelace. Miss Crane, she said, do you think people change? The question hit me like a thud in my chest. She was 10. Bright. Quiet. One of those kids who notices everything and says very little. Sometimes, I said after a moment. But not always. She nodded like she understood more than I gave her credit for. Then she asked if she could stay in the classroom a bit longer. She didn't want to go home yet. I said yes. And I realized that maybe I didn't have to heal the way people expected me to. Maybe I just had to keep showing up. For people like her. For myself. A few days later, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a crumpled photo. Me at 11, sitting on the couch, holding a birthday cake. Caleb beside me, grinning. Our parents in the background, blurry, distracted. A faint burn mark curled one edge of the picture. I stared at it for a long time. I wasn't sure who sent it. Maybe my parents. Maybe Caleb. Maybe someone else entirely. I didn't want it. But I didn't throw it away. Instead, I put it in a drawer. That same week, I finally responded to one of Caleb's voicemails. Not with a call. Just a text. You got what you asked for. You made your choices. I'm not the person who's going to fix them. He didn't respond. The silence was somehow more unsettling than the calls. I'd grown up bracing for chaos, for yelling, for blame. But this quiet uncertainty. It felt like being in the eye of a storm that might not be done yet. A week passed. Then two. Then one night I came home to Simon sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his laptop with a furrowed brow. He looked up slowly. I didn't mean to pry, he said. But I got curious. I looked them up. I sat down beside him. A grainy news article. A motel fire. 2 were hospitalized. 1 with third-degree burns. My chest tightened, but I kept reading. The names matched. Diane was in critical condition. Harold had been treated and released. No mention of where he went after. No comments on the article. Just a cold write-up on the local paper's website, filed under minor incidents. I closed the laptop. Simon reached for my hand. Do you want to go see them? He asked gently. I shook my head. I don't know what good it would do. Sometimes, he said, you don't go for them. That night, I stood in the bathroom, staring at myself in the mirror. For the first time in years, I saw myself clearly, not the daughter they gave up on, not the shadow of Caleb's promise, not the wounded teen trying to prove she was worth something. Just me. Tired. But standing. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm. The house was still. Simon was asleep, one arm tucked under his pillow, the other resting across the cat curled beside him. The cherry blossoms were almost gone from the tree outside our bedroom window, the petals now scattered like pale confetti across the yard. I made coffee but didn't drink it. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop, typing in the hospital name from the article. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. A room number? A visiting schedule? A reason to forget I'd ever seen the news? Instead, I found a basic patient update posted on the site. Patient, Diane Crane, stable condition, restricted visitor list. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. I knew I wasn't on that list. Not because I'd been removed, but because I was never added to begin with. Why would I be? Still, the knot in my chest stayed there all day. Even through the math quizzes, the faculty meeting, and the polite small talk in the hallway. Even during dinner with Simon, pasta and roasted squash, both of which I pushed around the plate more than I ate. Is she going to make it? He asked, finally. I don't know. He nodded, quietly respectful of the boundaries I hadn't even fully drawn for myself yet. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my old journals. I had kept dozens over the years, usually half-filled, the rest trailing off mid-thought. They were full of first apartments and late bills and grocery lists written in the margins. But woven between the lines were memories I'd buried deep, scraps of my life that felt distant and paper-thin. There was one entry that stood out. I was 23, working night shifts and barely keeping the lights on. I'd written, they said I wouldn't make it without them. I think they were half right. I didn't make it because of them. I made it in spite of them. Reading that now felt like a gut punch. I hadn't been back to Syracuse in years. I had no reason to go. No ties left there but decaying memories and cracked sidewalks that led nowhere. But 2 days later, I found myself driving down the thruway, heart pounding the closer I got. I didn't go to the hospital. Not yet. I drove past the street I grew up on. Past the old school where I used to walk Caleb home every day while Mom was too tired from work. Past the corner store where I bought my first notebook with babysitting money. It was all there. Unchanged and falling apart at the same time. I parked outside the house we used to live in. It looked smaller than I remembered. The paint peeled in long strips along the siding. The porch was collapsing on one side. A rusted car sat in the driveway like a forgotten relic. I stayed in the car, engine off, just staring. So many ghosts. I thought about knocking. Not that anyone would answer, it had been sold off years ago, probably to a landlord who never even bothered to repaint. Still, I had the strange urge to walk up those old steps and demand to know why none of it was enough. Why wasn't I ever enough? Instead, I turned the key in the ignition and drove away. At the motel, I asked for a room under the name Harold Crane. The woman at the front desk gave me a look of pity, like she knew too much. Or maybe she just didn't know anything at all and had seen too many people walk through with heavy eyes and empty wallets. He checked out 2 nights ago. Didn't leave a number, she said. Left some stuff in the room, though. She handed me a small plastic bag. Inside was a folded shirt, a wallet with no cash, and a worn photograph. It was the same one they had mailed to me earlier, the birthday scene, the same blurry background. But this one was different. On the back, in Harold's handwriting, she was always stronger than we gave her credit for. That stopped me. Not because it was an apology, it wasn't. It wasn't even close. But it was the first sign I'd ever had that maybe, just maybe, he saw me at all. I didn't cry. Not there. Not then. Instead, I drove home in silence, the bag resting on the passenger seat like a ghost. Simon was waiting on the porch when I got back. No questions, just an open door and a quiet hug that said, "You're home." That's enough. We didn't talk much that night. I took a shower and climbed into bed early. The photo stayed on my nightstand. I thought I'd sleep better. I didn't. That night, I dreamt of Caleb. He was 10 years old, standing in the backyard of our old house, holding a soccer ball. He asked me if I wanted to play. I said no. He asked again. I said I was tired. He dropped the ball and walked away. In the dream, I picked it up. And I threw it as far as I could. 3 weeks passed. No more voicemails. No more blocked calls. Nothing from Harold, and certainly not from Caleb. It was as if they'd disappeared again, only this time, it didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like closure slowly folding in on itself. I kept waiting for something, an outburst, a desperate plea, even a guilt-ridden apology. But nothing came. And strangely, that gave me power I didn't realize I had. One afternoon, just after school let out, I was sitting at my desk grading essays when I received a new email from a law firm in Syracuse. My first thought was, here it is. They want something. But it wasn't from my parents. It was from a junior associate handling small estate recoveries. Turns out, my name had been listed, buried under paperwork Harold had filed before vanishing. The house had finally gone into foreclosure, and a few belongings were left behind, including a handwritten letter, some documents, and a safety deposit box key with no known bank information. I almost deleted the message. But something held me back. I replied, told them they could mail whatever it was to my address. 2 weeks later, a plain manila envelope arrived. The letter inside was from my father. Sloppy, uneven handwriting. Pages creased from what looked like water damage. Or tears. It was. Half apology, half justification. Full of phrases like "we didn't know better," and "Caleb was our last chance," and "we never thought you'd make it without us." That last part almost made me laugh. What struck me most wasn't the apology, it was the final paragraph: "We spent our whole lives banking on Caleb to rescue us. We thought the golden child would grow up and come back for us. But he didn't. He turned out just like we raised him, entitled, empty, and transactional. We gave him everything and taught him nothing. And we gave you nothing. But somehow, you became everything. Everything." He wrote it, but I don't think he understood it. They hadn't just underestimated me. They had misunderstood love. Investment. Resilience. They thought spoiling someone meant creating success. And they thought tough love meant neglect. They got it backward. The safety deposit box was empty when the firm tracked down the bank it belonged to. Just an old locket, some papers, and my birth certificate. It was laughable. A legacy worth pennies. But a thought started to brew in my head, one I hadn't considered before. I knew where Caleb worked. His LinkedIn was up to date. A digital marketing startup in Oakland. Public-facing. A bio that described him as a passionate, forward-thinking leader with strong family values. Family values. Of course. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I logged into Facebook and posted a photo. It was the one they'd mailed, the birthday picture, faded and burned. I posted it with a caption, "They kicked me out at 17 because I wasn't worth the investment." 20 years later, they called from a motel, sick and homeless. Funny how the golden child forgot them. I didn't. I just finally stopped picking up the phone. I didn't tag Caleb. I didn't need to. The post quietly made its rounds. A few shares, a few comments, mostly from old classmates, people who remembered bits and pieces. One person messaged me privately and said, "Your brother's been running a podcast about overcoming adversity. Just heard him talk about being raised by a single mom." I nearly spit out my tea. Apparently, Caleb had reinvented himself. Claimed he was raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs while he pulled himself up by his bootstraps. He was pitching a memoir. You can't make this up. And I didn't have to. Because sometimes revenge doesn't look like fire or fury. Sometimes, it looks like being the living reminder of someone else's lies unraveling. 2 days later, I got a direct message on Instagram from Caleb. I didn't even know he followed me. "What the hell is your problem?" I didn't respond. A few hours later, "That post is hurting my brand. You don't know what I've been through." Still no response. Final message: "I can't believe you're doing this. You're pathetic." So I posted again. This time, no photo. Just text: "I survived what you inherited. If you want to call that pathetic, that's fine. But just remember, you're the one begging me to stay silent." That message exploded. His podcast's comments section is filled with questions. People dug up public records. Found the foreclosure. The motel fire. Photos of our parents that didn't align with his origin story. Eventually, he took down his website. Paused the podcast. Deleted his Twitter. He disappeared into the very silence he once used as a weapon against me. That wasn't cruelty. It was accountability. And as for Harold and Diane? They never reached out again. Not after the post. Not after the box. Not after the silence finally roared louder than all their years of noise. They're out there somewhere. Maybe in another motel. Maybe still waiting for a call that will never come. As for me, I kept teaching. I kept loving. I kept living. Because the best revenge, in the end, isn't destruction. It's survival. It's being exactly who they said you couldn't become. It's walking past the wreckage and not once looking back.